much present. Erie, like many legacy cities, has seen its economy transition over the years and is presently navigating that transition from an industrial economy of the 20th century to an emerging new economy today. That includes meds, eds, and new innovations in a green economy and a blue economy. Now, I was fortunate to have been abroad thanks to the German government-sponsored study tour that took a look at the Ruhr region of Germany and other parts of the country to learn about that country's approach to green and just transition. That was during the summer of 2023. There, broadly speaking, I saw the power and potential of federal-led top-down approach to transitioning economies that runs counter, perhaps, to the American mythos that innovation famously sparks in garages or emanates out of Silicon Valley. Now, I am, of course, painting both countries. I toured in one I live in and toured just for a week in my own motherland with a very broad brush, because, as we know, there is, of course, much more to the picture than just that. But a key takeaway for me from that trip was the power of not just seeing, but experiencing and learning about another's place, an approach to not just managing transition, but working to create a climate in which economies grow and change and thrive, and residents have the opportunity to grow and change and thrive. And we consider not just our placement in our towns and cities, but our connection to our planet. I cannot understate the power. I believe in the idea of international idea sharing, opportunities for us to share our successes, acknowledge our challenges, to teach and learn from each other, so the progress happens not in isolation, but perhaps in concert. Now, today's topic is a central one, confronting economic change makers in all of our democracies. In the US, Germany, Sweden, and elsewhere in Europe and beyond, there is a broad majority of the public that wants to see action to ameliorate climate change and its negative effects, that even believes that going green and ameliorating climate change can be a source of good, new, well-paying jobs to replace those in aging industries, heavy extracting industries that many regions relied upon for years, and they can reinvigorate rural areas suffering from loss of young people, loss of jobs, and an impact to their economy. Yet in all of these countries, we are working to confront and I would say overcome or turn around what many describe as a greenlash, in which many climate change denying, or just contrarian leaders encourage residents to believe that policies and practices to support the green economy transformation are being done to them, not with them, by urban elites, and that these policies are detrimental to the traditional way of farming and to rural, industrial, and/or extractive region residents and their way of life. Now, we're here today to talk about how these attitudes can be turned around and learn about other countries and what they're doing, and to extract insights from those lessons learned from some key leaders of change around heartland regions, and how that can come to not only embrace but lead and benefit from the great green transformation. Now, we have four great guests, and if I spent my time giving their full and deservingly so impressive biographies, I'd eat up the entire call. I'll ask them to talk a little bit about themselves, but I'll introduce them briefly here as Bernd Mettenlicher, member of the Regional Parliament of Baden-Württemberg, Germany, Lisa Pelling of Swedish think tank Arena ID, Matt Russell, State Executive Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency in Iowa and an Iowa farmer himself, and Sebastian Striegel, member of the State Parliament of Saxony-Anhalt from Halle, Germany. Before I turn to our guests, some quick housekeeping. We are hosting this event both in Zoom webinar and live streaming on the JES's Facebook page. If you're attending via Zoom, feel free to interact with us using the Q&A function. As following the presentation, we're going to work our way to work through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can. If you're tuning in via Facebook, leave your questions and comments in the comment section of this post. And again, we're going to work our way to work through as many questions as we can following this discussion. If you're listening to or watching a later broadcast of this program, still send us your questions, your comments to keep this conversation going, either on the JES's website, jeserie.org, or on our YouTube channel. And for more information about the JES and the Transforming the Industrial Heartlands initiative, do visit our website, jeserie.org. Let's start in Germany, Bernd. Tell us a bit about your corner of your country in Germany. What do people do there? How do people, most people, make a living? How are residents experiencing the growing demands from the EU and the German governments to make big moves toward a green economy? That pressure from that top down. Is there a noticeable difference between rural and urban populations to greening policies, as we often hear about an urban and rural divide? So take us to your neck of the woods, give us a state of play and a bit of the work you're doing.
Dear Ben, dear everybody, yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion today. So thank you very much for inviting me. Well, first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm 52 years old. I'm married and we have two kids. And I'm a member of the State Parliament of Baden-Württemberg since the year 2021. Before that, I was working as a science teacher for 15 years. I developed software in a company. I did research at the University of Constance in the biomedical field. And my background, I grew up on a farm, so Matt, we have something together. And I think the variety of jobs and my background helps me in my actual job as a politician. Let me give you a short summary about the economic and political situation here in the southwestern part of Germany in the state of Baden-Württemberg. If Baden-Württemberg would be a country by itself, its economy would be the seventh biggest in Europe. It would be even bigger than countries like Sweden, Belgium, or Austria. And more than 30% of the jobs here in Baden-Württemberg are in the industrial sector. So automotive, companies like Mercedes or Porsche, machinery, optical and pharmaceutical industry is important. And the backbone of the economy here is a large amount of small and medium-sized enterprises which are often family-owned. So we also have a big amount of so we call hidden champions, companies that do quite well in their specific business area. So if you play poker or your kids have Pokemon cards, the chance that the cardboard that these cards are made by, that they are coming from my region, from my constituency, from the Köhler paper mill is by 80%. What also is very specific about this area is that 5% of the gross product from Baden-Württemberg goes into research and development. This percentage is quite high. In the last elections, my party, the Green Party, got almost a third of the votes. So we provide the head of the government, and his name is Winfried Kretschmann, and he's in charge for now 13 years. And we formed a government together with the Conservative Party, CDU, in a coalition. And maybe this is also interesting that we form a coalition between, I would say, both sides of the political spectrum. So let me point out to your question about the rural and the urban areas. Here in Baden-Württemberg, we actually do have both sides. We have the rural and the urban areas, but in terms of living standards, I have to say that there is not a really gap between these. Of course, access of cultural issues and things like that, they are different, but in terms of living standards or costs of living, they're almost equal. Now let me talk about the risks. I also pointed out already that the industrial sector is quite big here. So industry needs energy, and this energy should at best also be cheap. And this is one of the big challenges right now that we face, especially wind energy can provide that. And to be honest, here in Baden-Württemberg, we haven't done enough in the last 10 years to use this potential. So also the automotive sector is strong, and you know that there is a big transition going through, and the loss of jobs is already there. But on the other side, we have a lack of skilled workers, so the market still absorbs that. On the loss on the other side, they go to some other places. But yeah, the risks are growing, and the last election, the European election, the left-wing party, the AfD, won about 20%. And so this is a warning sign telling us that we should address a broad variety of things in terms of transition. So people are facing change, and some of the people are following the ones that are telling them in the past everything was better. And I'm glad that we come together here to address issues. And so I pass you back to you, Ben, and I'm looking forward to talk to you.
Vern, thank you so much. And I promise I'm not playing favorites by now moving to another farmer because I myself in southwestern Pennsylvania, my first job was as a farmhand, and my father was a coal miner. So I have the lived experience of this. But I do want to go to our other farmer on the call, and maybe we'll learn that others too have a direct connection. But Matt Russell, you were a farmer in Iowa, organizing other farmers to tap their creativity to solve climate change problems before you joined the Biden administration. So I'd like to hear from you about that work, what the attitudes of Iowa farmers and small town residents toward the idea of combating climate change were. What were the messages that they were getting from the outside? How did that influence conversations happening on the inside? And how did that work when it came to your organizing that group of people in Iowa?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So a little bit of background. I'm a farmer. I'm 54, and all of those 54 years except 8, I've either lived on the farm I grew up on or the farm my husband and I have now that we bought in 2005. Or I should say, are still buying, but we started that process in 2005. And so I'm very grounded in Iowa, very grounded in agriculture and doing farming, but also in agricultural leadership for since about 1999. And so just a little background on where, and I'll speak mostly on farmers, but I think this spills over into the investments the Biden-Harris administration are making, and certainly Congress as well, into empowering rural America to be part of the climate solution. So that's kind of the frame. I'll mostly offer farming because that's what I know most, but it does that attitude and strategy spills over into clean energy, rural communities, infrastructure, and you know, all through the Midwest, across the country too, but specifically, you know, this Midwest region of the United States. So if we go back to, you know, 2000, into the early 2000s, Farm Bureau and the Iowa Farm Bureau and the National Farmers Union were both doing these big projects in terms of climate mitigation on farms, right? So they had a climate exchange, they had a climate carbon exchange with Farm Bureau. The National Farmers Union was working with, you know, land that farmers were farming that could then be, you know, traded to what was happening on the farms could be traded with industrial emissions, right? That's a very simple explanation. Going into 2008, the beginning of the Obama administration, the Waxman-Markey cap and trade bill was getting a lot of traction, and the ag community had kind of been brought on, but at the last hour, almost the entire agriculture community in the United States, the big players, the farm groups and some of the agribusiness, they pivoted to be against that cap and trade, right? So they frame this as this is going to be that top-down regulatory, put farmers out of business, right? So from that point on, we saw a much more kind of resourced climate skepticism amongst farmers, rural communities. So that was kind of the landscape going into the 2020 elections. But things had started to change. Farm groups had started to do some work, but we were still, the farming community was still kind of framing this as, well, we can't talk to farmers about climate change. We can talk to them about soil health and water quality. In other words, if we can get them to do the climate actions, but we don't talk about climate, then we'll be, you know, it doesn't matter, right? If they do the work, but we call it something else. That's not a really great strategy for getting people to act. And so we kind of in 2019, 2020 pivoted back into engaging farmers as the agents of change around climate change. So in 2020, you had the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, agribusiness, food industry, farm groups, all coming together to lay out some principles about climate action. And then the Biden-Harris administration, started in January of 2021, and absolutely have leaned into this idea that if you want action, you invest in the action, you invest in those who can take the action. And so enormous investments in farmers, in clean energy, in infrastructure, and then in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act. So $20 billion focused on climate, investing in farmers. So the landscape has really changed. And that's just a quick background. Now, where are we at and where are things headed? So the Biden-Harris administration, historic investments in climate action. I'll use one example. Secretary Vilsack, coming out of the 2019 caucus cycle, coming out of the 2020 election cycle, really taking those lessons and focusing on some strategies. Probably the biggest one, dollars and symbolic, is the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. So they put out a $1 billion grant, request for proposals for $1 billion. Huge uptake, ramped it up to $3 billion, and funded 140 some projects. Every project has farmers on their farm in these research projects, right? So that's a game changer. It wasn't investing in something other than farmers to sell to farmers. Farmers had to be part of this work in their fields at the field level. So that's an example of this enormous investment. And what you're seeing now is, even though there's an attempt to kind of pull back some of these resources, you're seeing the farm groups and farmers themselves step forward and say, whoa, don't take that away, right? So I think going forward, there's a lot of debate going to happen, how we keep doing this work, where the investments are going to go, where are we going to get the most change. But the game changer is that this administration has completely invested in the idea that you go at the local level, the rural communities, the farmers themselves, the small businesses and big businesses. They're the ones who are going to implement the change that gets us to our targets. And so investing them as agents of change and not just agents of reaction, right? Like, so this is happening and now you have to adjust. No, these are the investments, and now you're going to develop the strategies. So one of the things Secretary Vilsack's been talking about for over a year now is we are expanding revenue opportunities for a wider diversity of farmers. And this is a part of that strategy, that farmers themselves, climate action becomes an additional revenue stream on the farm. And so that's kind of the concept. And then we're using policy to invest in that strategy. And it's still up in the air, right? It's not a done deal. We're still working towards that, but there's a lot of hope. And I'll just stop there and hand it back to you, Ben.
Yep, Matt, thank you so much for that. And I think that there's something important noted there, and going beyond the language, but actually the inclusion of having people who are impacted at the local level doing the work, actually being those change agents. And I think that helps us tear down a perception of perhaps monolithic rural culture, whether that is in the US or abroad. And Lisa, I want to come to you, because you and your colleagues just recently published some interesting research based on interviews in more rural parts of Sweden with residents and communities that were experiencing economic loss and decline. What did you find? How did their lived experience color and inform their views toward big national European push to go green? How did their attitudes perhaps differ from residents of urban Sweden in prospering regions? Give us a pulse on what you saw and what your colleagues are reporting on.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you for this insight, Bernd and Matt as well. I'm so happy to be on board and joining this conversation today, and very happy to contribute to this very important initiative as well. I'm looking forward to staying in touch and see how we can continue to contribute. I'm a political scientist based in Stockholm, no farming experience, unfortunately, but I share your conviction that rural communities are absolutely key to the green transformation and to making the change that we need to see now. And this was one motivation while we headed on this study. So what we've been doing, Ben, as you mentioned, we have conducted interviews with 200 people, doorstep interviews, just basically knocking on doors in 4 rural communities in Sweden and asking people spontaneously what they think about climate change and what they think about the green transition. And one thing that we could see in this research, and this has been shown in research before, but maybe we could add some colors, some flesh and bones, some voices to this, was that people in rural communities are often portrayed, and I think this is what you mentioned as well, Matt, as people who are reactionary, who are unwilling to change, who maybe even are framed as climate deniers. And what we saw when we talked to people in these rural communities was that people are very much aware about climate change. They notice this everywhere around them and how nature has changed, how the crops changing, the temperature of the pond where they go fishing. There were so many examples on how climate is changing, and people were indeed worried, but they had to worry about other things too. And these worries are worries that are shared, I think, by rural communities across Europe and the US as well. It's of demographic decline, it's of decline of services that you need to master your everyday life. It's all the pharmacies moving further away. It's more difficult to do your grocery shopping, and services that are basic to human well-being, such as healthcare, is also becoming less accessible. So people have these worries, and these worries are being exacerbated by the cost of living crisis. So people are asking themselves, well, I can't afford my normal life. How am I supposed to afford, if I can't afford to buy a new car at all, how am I supposed to afford to buy an electric car? How is that going to happen? So we identify that people would not lack willingness, they don't lack awareness, but they do lack capabilities. They would need more opportunities, more possibilities to adjust their daily lives. And the good news is that these capabilities are there. You know, there are already policies being developed, and we know how we can go about this. And in many parts of Sweden, indeed, it is the green transformation, the green industrial revolution that is bringing these capabilities to people. New production facilities, such as the production of batteries for electric cars that have been placed in rural communities, that are giving new employment opportunity, new hope to these communities. But one other thing I'd like to point out from our study as well, and that's a warning, is that if you're not able to bridge the gap between what people know, what people worry about, the consciousness that people have about climate change actually happening, being a threat to their way of life, and the capabilities, the possibilities, the means they need to tackle this situation, you risk to have a lot of frustration. There will be a lot of fear. There can be a lot of anger, bitterness as well. And there are political forces who are ready to exploit this. This is maybe why we are told that rural communities are, sorry to use this term, reactionary, backward, climate deniers. It's because people would like to portray them like that. And there are important interests who would like us to use rural communities as an excuse not to move forward on the green agenda. So here we need to be conscious, and we need to make sure that the voices of rural communities are actually heard in the true sense, not the prejudices that people would like to spread, but actually make sure that their voices are being heard.
Lisa, thank you so much for that. And I think, one, the idea of the connectivity just on this call and with the dozens of people tuning in on the webinar and on the Facebook page, part of this conversation listening. And I think that's a great step in the right direction. And I think you're really right about at least my perspective in America, regions that are often referred to as flyover country, that you would never stop there, you would never visit there, and that we only hear about these regions when unfortunately a tragedy befalls them, whether it's a national disaster or a school shooting or something that would draw national attention. Otherwise, we don't think of them. They're not in the mainstream media or the zeitgeist in a way that other more populous regions would be. And then playing into that fear of you've been forgotten, you've been left behind, and I am here to save you and to do this for you. And I think we certainly see that in the US. And so one note I would say is we will share your report with all of the viewers and make sure that folks have access to that. And of course, any of the other critical research that any one of our other panelists are working on. And of course, last but certainly not least, I want to go back to the country that we began with here on the call in Germany. And I want to head back to you, Sebastian. I want to talk about East Germany and to get a perception of that region. One that relied heavily on chemical industries and other heavy industries. How did workers in your region, how did they view the prospect of going green? We've seen the rise. We've mentioned the AfD party, Alternative for Germany party, already in conversation. We're seeing some elections being won politically in Eastern Germany. What's the reaction? What's the attitude toward big moves to try to rein in polluters, to try to curb dirty industry? Work in your region toward the complexity of introducing new industries and adopting those. What does that look like?
Okay, thanks for having me here. And let me start with this farmer and miner thing first here. I'm going on to an internship on a farm tomorrow, so that's for a start there. And if you look at my family history, the generation of my grandfathers and great-grandfathers, they are actually from the mining industry. So there is this bit in my history here as well. And looking at East Germany and the ex-GDR, and looking towards Bern, there's quite a lot of difference between the two regions we are representing here within Germany. But I think it's worthwhile to look at the different also advantages my region has there towards Baden-Württemberg as well, and I will come to that a little later. But let's go back to the year 19 or to the late 1980s first, and let's say the environmental situation and the dire environmental situation in the former GDR was one important driving force for people to gather together at that time on the streets and protest the communist government. This was in addition to the freedom of movement, democratic elections, and freedom of speech, etc. But the environment and the dire situation there was one and maybe even a very important mover. And I come from a small city. It's called Merseburg, in the middle of an area once called the Chemiedreieck, the chemical triangular. And in 1990, my first demonstration was an environmental demonstration. And just to illustrate that, Merseburg by that time had about 45,000 inhabitants. At that demonstration, there were 10,000 people on the streets. So you see quite a number, quite a share of the population was actually on the streets to protest this situation. And when the peaceful revolution in this area was successful, this did not only lead to the end of the communist government, but also it brought down the already tumbling GDR economy, including the chemical industry. And we had about 60,000 people working in that chemical industry in the region by that time. And only about 5 years later, this came down to 6,000 to 8,000 in the mid-1990s. So you see, and you can imagine what sort of structural change, or better downfall, I would say, it means for a region when 90% of the jobs in the leading industry have gone over 5 years' time. And you see that in cracks of people's biographies, and we are still shouldering that burden. And you can see it in the demographics. Loads of young people, and especially young skilled women, have left. We see high results for right-wing parties. We had our local elections just recently. About 1/3 of the share of the seats went to the AfD, to this right-wing, very radical right-wing party. So there is exactly that stuff happening, which Lisa is telling us, and you see all that. But I don't want to draw this picture of an area which is deprived or anything. We aren't. We were once promised blooming landscapes, blühende Landschaften, the Chancellor Helmut Kohl said by that time. And actually, we have those blooming landscapes. Industry has picked up. It has changed dramatically, with new streets being built, new railway lines. And so there's quite a lot of modernization going. And there are successes all over. The one difference to Baden-Württemberg is there is not so much local money in that. So there's not a lot of old inherited families being able to spend money. We don't have much of research and development in our industry. We are just sort of prolonged workbenches, which is one thing I think we need to change. We need to have our own R&D facilities quite stronger there. But one of the big advantages in our area is that we have invested very heavily into renewable energies. Like about 60% of the energy being consumed in my state, and this is still growing at the moment, and it's growing in a very fast way, is now coming from renewables. And that is one important reason why, for example, Intel, they are building a big new plant in our state at the moment in Magdeburg, why they have been coming to us and not going to Baden-Württemberg or to another German state, because they say we need 100% green energy for our new plant. And we can get it. We can specifically get it in East Germany, and that's why we are going there. So this is a success story. And what I'm actually aiming at is people in our area in the east of Germany. They're experts of change, and we need to sort of strengthen that view that they can see themselves as being experts of change, in order to be proud of that, and in order to manage this big structural change which is going on and which is actually really picking up pace at the moment, to enhance that. Let me just stop with one short thing there. We have in Germany a political process which leads to the phasing out of lignite coal. It was a big consensus process. And this consensus came to the point where we said on a national level, we phase out coal by 2038. In my region, this would mean phase out coal for burning it for electrical power in 2034. But still that will not happen. We will get out of coal far earlier by about 2028, 2030, because it's just not a business case anymore to burn coal. And so we have to adjust the speed in which we are changing even more. And that's a big adventure also for the political area.
So Sebastian, thank you for that. And I was particularly latched on to the idea of R&D in these regions because during the structural change and transitioning economies study tour that I was part of, I remember just being so impressed with Brandenburg Technical University when we had a chance to tour that and seeing the connection between, or the imagined connection between, and building out a campus and the role of research happening, in an academic setting. And I was reminded in Erie, Pennsylvania, that although it doesn't have an R1, a research level 1 university, the smaller universities have come together to form a conglomeration, the Northwest Pennsylvania Innovation Beehive Network, to look at economic issues and to drive them forward using their collective might rather than working or operating in silos. But I really like that idea of building that national consensus and building that conversation and moving towards something. And I want to stay in Germany for a second, and Bernd, I want to come back to you about consensus building and what that's looked like in your particular region that you've been doing work to organize around the green economy and in industry. Tell us a little bit more of what you're working on in context of what you've heard from your country peer and others, what you've learned in the process of how to make greening and make great transformation a positive for residents of the community, to get them to see that and then perhaps build that buy-in so that it's not a fractured conversation, but perhaps a more unified front toward a common shared goal that all residents can unite around. Your experience, Bernd.
Yeah. So the question is, yeah, what can we do on a local level? As you also said, Matt, bottom up to support the change. So how can we achieve that citizens, especially in the rural areas, don't think that they are left alone? And as Lisa, you pointed out that climate change is visible, and I agree on that. And I also know that people in our area exactly know about it. So the fact that decarbonization is a necessity, yeah, this is to most of the people, they agree on that. And it becomes a name, for example, if we talk about electricity. Yeah, so for example, windmills or solar panels, they are visible to almost everybody. With a nuclear power or a coal power plant, this was not the case in the past, or it's not. So this, to fulfill the change, it's often a question of acceptance. So what we try to do to increase the acceptance and to fulfill this change is, for example, one thing is with the citizens referendum. So an example, a small community in my area, they ask their citizens to vote in favor or against windmills in their community area. And in the same time, they showed the people how the commune profits from the windmills. And we have a law that if somebody sets up a windmill per megawatt, the commune gets €2. It is not mandatory, but usually this money is being paid. So altogether, it comes to 40 to 50,000 euros a year for the commune. And also, if the commune has their own land, they can lease it to the companies, and they get another maybe 150 or 200,000 euros a year. So altogether, this pays for the kindergarten and the streets and everything like that on a structural basis for the next 20 years. And so the citizens recognize that renewable green energy creates value that is being for all of them. Another way of sharing the value and enhancing acceptance is to have the citizens being part of what we call Energiegenossenschaften, or energy cooperatives. So of course you have to have then people around in your area that are willing and also be able to invest in these cooperatives. But if they are there, then it also is something that the value stays in the region, and the acceptance also therefore is higher. Talking about agriculture, we have also the thing research and development. I have in my region a lot of special cultures, what we say Sonderkulturen, meaning apple trees or strawberries and other things like that. For example, I have a farmer that put up solar panels over his apple trees. And it benefits both sides. It benefits the apples because it's a protection from the hail. So if a hailstorm comes, it'll protect it. And on the other side, you can not only harvest apples, but also harvest energy. So, and we have that research project that looks how things work and how it comes out at the end on a basis, well, it's quite an investment. So, but within 10 to 15 years if it pays off, and it looks quite well. So it looks quite good, and it's something that other farmers now also start to do. So, and also, like you said, Matt, you have to start with investments. You have to put things on the ground and say, okay, if you're willing to do this, we'll help you. But things like that happen. You have to have that money state-wise. You have to invest that. But we try to do this on the best, and so we are looking forward to in this case renewable energy, to raise the amount to above 30%, which is now about 30%. Compared to what Sebastian said, he has a higher amount in his state. We have to gain more, but we're on the way to do that. Thank you.
Bernd, thank you so much. And Matt, I want to get to investments in the US side and your work in the Biden administration. But before I do, let's not leave Germany too quickly. Sebastian, I'm curious about windmills or renewables in your portion of the country, what that looks like before we talk about US investment in the Biden-Harris administration with Matt. Sebastian, what do windmills look like in your region?
Just one or two small sentences there, which mark, I think, an important difference between Saxony-Anhalt and Baden-Württemberg there. Not all, but most of those windmills in my country are actually owned by people in Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, and so on. And that's part of the problem for us, because people in my region, they have the windmills. They pay extra prices for the grid because the grid has to be modernized to actually get all those windmill energy in. And we don't have the benefits there. So there you have this intra-state and intra-German debate on, okay, actually, we want to have benefits from the windmills we are seeing in our state as well. And that's what we are working on politically. We have this Beteiligungsgesetz, participation law now going as well, which should lead eventually to more money going into the communities so that they earn the extra money. The problem is in East Germany, there is not so much money from private people being able to spend 100,000 euros or whatever participating in a windmill themselves. So that's part of the problem there.
Well, and Sebastian, thank you for that. And I think that harkens back to Lisa, what you were saying earlier too, of the ability to conceptualize how can I buy an electric vehicle if I can't currently afford a combustion engine vehicle. If I cannot get out of the economy I'm currently in, how can I spend more money, on something? And it's that investment up front that pays off over time. But if you don't have that capital on hand right now, you can't make that kind of investment. I do want to get into that in a minute, Lisa, but Matt, I promised I'd go back to you because we talked about your experience outside of the Biden-Harris administration, and I want to ask you, in terms of what the administration's doing, the ambitious climate change agenda, how are you trying to make it work for the residents of farm country? Touching a little bit more on that again, and leaning into, what are you learning, in the process? What does that conversation look like as you're navigating the big change, green transformation in the U.S.? What Europeans might refer to as the Great Transformation, to get the buy-in from folks from a government perspective, talking about that federal level approach, that top-down. What does that dialogue look like? How are things working in Iowa?
I'm actually going to go back. So before I came into the administration, I was doing some interfaith work on climate action, working with farmers. So for a couple of decades now, the military in the United States has identified climate change as a threat multiplier. And when we were doing this work with farmers, we were framing this as climate action is an equity multiplier. In other words, if we're going to do climate action, we have to engage bottom up, more people, more diversity, all of that. So that thinking of that, equity multiplier. And what farmers themselves were saying is that if we invest in conservation, the benefits of that are externalized, right? So long term, I may have some soil health benefits, but the real benefit is that, wildlife, water quality, emissions, carbon sequestration, those big benefits get externalized from my operation. I can't take it to the bank. On the pollution side, so you got farmers that are really doing a poor job, right? And some of our agricultural systems that need to change, that pollution gets externalized. So the cost goes to the public, right? And so the big thing that this administration's been really thinking about and investing is you can punish the polluters, right? Or you can develop systems that reward the conservation. In other words, if I'm farming and I'm making these investments with this public benefit, that then there's an internalized financial incentive and reward for doing that, right? That's the game changer. And that's the thing that this administration's been looking at. And I want to go back to what Sebastian and Lisa both said, right? So this is really big structural change. So effective climate action is structural change. Like, it's not just, we just tweak around the edges and we fix everything. And everybody that is kind of at the top of the economy, they stay all the same. No, it's structural change. But when we invest in those farmers, that structural change is a benefit, right? That's not an existential threat. That's a new revenue stream. It's a stay in your community. It's a develop and as well, Sebastian and Bernd were both talking about, when you have this clean energy, where's the benefit, where's the cost? And when the community benefits, then you see this stuff move forward faster. And where you see a cost, then it slows down, right? So that's the big theory of change. And so this administration, and then back to what Lisa was saying as well, people have these choices to make, right? On my daily life, if I can invest in conservation, integrate that with production, but it doesn't provide a greater revenue stream, then it's just a cost. And if I'm trying to think how I'm staying on my farm, staying in business, making my family household expenditures, then adding an additional kind of altruistic benefit becomes difficult. And I'm much more susceptible then to be sold this notion that the structural change is going to crush me. But when we shift that to the farmers, to the small businesses, to the communities are now the center of change, and the revenue stream rewards them, that's the game changer. So when you look at the billions and billions of dollars this administration has put into infrastructure, put into climate smart agriculture and other clean energy efforts, that's the game changer. And time will tell, right? Whether the structural change that can lead us to a hopeful future is something we all embrace, or whether that structural change is such a threat that the pushback then becomes slowing it down, stalling it. And that's the moment we're in, I think, globally, right?
And right to that, Matt, Lisa, I want to turn to you, because your report, you have next steps. The life that we live here, your report, you talk to residents in struggling regions, and you've identified and suggest important critical next steps at all levels that folks can take to build local ownership, optimism around the great green transformation, even in communities where perhaps folks don't agree or see eye to eye on everything or have different priorities. What are those steps? What is the most important to do to make green transformation work well for residents in less prosperous areas? What did you find?
Thank you so much, Ben. There's so many interesting things being said here. Just a short comment on the German windmill experience. One of the things that we do as a think tank is trying to bring good examples, best practices from other countries into Sweden. And one of the reports recently published was actually on the community sharing on wind in Germany, which I think is truly inspiring. So what did we find out when we spoke to these people? Actually, we were inspired by a German study that was done a few years ago, and they entitled their study, also built on interviews with people in structurally disadvantaged areas, rural communities. They said people are structurally weak but rich in experience. So there's this way of looking at rural areas as areas that never changes, areas that where time stands still and there's no movement anywhere. And that's simply not true. People living in rural areas have experienced dramatic changes. Maybe not as dramatic as the Wende, the reunification of Germany in East Germany's case, but truly dramatic changes. So there's a well of experience to tap into, and this would be our main conclusion, that if you are to achieve a green transformation, you need to have people on board, and you need to use their experiences and enable them to express their experiences, their fears, their worries, but also their ideas for moving forward. So if I take the example of the community of Sollefteå in mid-north Sweden, when we get there, one of the most depressing places I've ever been in Sweden is the closed down railway station at Sollefteå. You know, you step out on the platform and it's stepping into the movie The Last of Us. You know, you get this impression of being in the middle of an apocalyptic landscape where the tracks are all covered with bushes and it's all abandoned, but for the drug addicts. So you'd realize that to the train station in Sollefteå, there are no trains arriving, but the opioid crisis has arrived there as well, as to other structurally weak areas with a lot of unemployment. And when you come to these places and say, hey, you know, here in Sollefteå, we're planning for this big industrial facility to produce biofuels for aircrafts, people go, yeah, sure. We've heard these promises before. They either didn't materialize or materialized in a way that lasted for a decade, maybe, and then we were left in the community with the remains, the dirt, the polluted soil, the buildings that we couldn't afford to tear down. So, you know, people's experiences are also negative sometimes of big transformative changes. So you need to take that into account as well. But our main conclusion is, you know, speak to people, invite them into conversations, tap into the well of experiences that people carry, and really make this a dialogue about the future.
So Lisa, thank you for that. Matt, thank you for the note on the side. If I can, I want to draw that out. And Lisa, if I can ask you if you can just even in a broad sense, give us an idea of how you were able to achieve this. Because I think Matt, to your note to me here, I couldn't agree more that, you know, having a revenue stream for the local expertise is really a game changer, and you've tapped into getting that local voice, making sure that folks are heard, and then being able to process that data that you've gathered and feed that back in. Can you tell us what powered your work, how you were able to resource some of this?
We were surprised that people opened their doors. We were aware that we were doing this study in a post-pandemic world. We thought that maybe people would be afraid, but at least in the Swedish case, us walking up to the door, knocking on it, and saying, "Hey, I'm from a Swedish Stockholm-based think tank. Do you have a few minutes to talk to me?" And then we would be asking them, "So, what do you think works well in Sweden?" And people go, "Works well in Sweden?" And they couldn't come up with an answer. And then we said, "So what doesn't work well?" And it was like, you know, opening a gates and getting a flood of information. People couldn't stop talking to us. And just these simple questions just got people talking. And I think, you know, many politicians do this. The best politicians do. They do canvassing work even when it's not election campaign. They would, you know, talk to people all the time. But I think we need to do that a lot more. And one worrying thing that we found was that when we asked people, how do you think climate change will affect your community? And we asked also, how do you think the efforts to mitigate or to stop climate change would affect your community? People were not able to tell us much. It was as if they hadn't thought about it. They didn't have a language. It clearly wasn't a topic around the kitchen table or in the workplace. So it's an important exercise just to have people talk about this. So when we have extreme weather, when we have inundations, when we'll have forest fires every summer, what does the community look like? Like what will it entail, and how do we need to change? And I think that's an important experience and exercise in itself.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that helps us continue to navigate a perception perhaps of people living in rural areas, that they're uninformed or disengaged in perhaps that's a perception because we haven't asked, we haven't knocked on a door, we haven't tried to talk to people and to gain their insights, and then to actually say this wasn't just a an exercise in knocking on a door and listening, but actually doing something with it. You all are doing tremendous things, and we're so grateful for your time with us today. And I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to be respectful of our attendees' time. And first, I would pledge, going back to Lisa, I think something you said earlier, the start of a conversation, that this is really a primer, and that using the vehicle of the Transforming Industrial Heartlands initiative to be able to promote more of your work, to share it out, to have these conversations, and certainly not look at this as the end of a conversation, but the beginning of something great, having these voices here gathered. So I want to ask in a way that you can each perhaps briefly sum up some of the key takeaways that you would leave our attendees with, and you would want us thinking about as we venture on into the rest of our day and wake up tomorrow and carry on the rest of the week. What do you hope that we're holding on to from the areas that you represent and the work that you do, knowing that we started this conversation with greening, seen as some greening as a threat, your key suggestions on how to turn a threat into something really to be an opportunity, that this isn't a challenge, but it's just an opportunity. How do we move through this in heartland regions, going back to our theme and our unifying umbrella as our organization? Matt, can I start with you of addressing threats to the greening, key recommendations and suggestions that you have to see this more as an opportunity in front of us, not a challenge, not something that divides us, but perhaps a chance to bring us together?
Yeah, what I take away from this conversation has been just an honor and privilege to be in this engagement. The threats and the challenges are global, right? This is not something that any one country can deal with. It is a global threat. But what's exciting is that listening to the European heartland and an American heartland, the opportunities are also global, right? There's a through line, and the things that will motivate and move our Midwestern American communities and farmers and business owners to action, I'm hearing, are very similar to the things that will move heartland European. So that similarity gives me incredible hope, and the investments in the theory of change, of elevating local. I loved what Lisa said. The experience, the rich experience, the expertise, creating a revenue stream for that, so that their creativity and innovation is part of the solution. Globally, that makes a huge difference. So I'm excited and hopeful. This has been for me a great morning. Thank you.
Matt, I really thank you for sharing that. And jumping across the pond, Sebastian, can we go to you? Key takeaways, suggestions, thoughts that you want to leave participants with, as well as your fellow panelists?
I think the most important thing was mentioned by Lisa. We need to have those basic services in those regions still going, and people feel that, they see that every day. And actually, if there's no basic service, if you can't meet at the bakery, you won't have a political discussion on change. And we need those political discussions, those societal discussions on change and how we achieve it in every single area, because it is happening all the time, and it's not always going to be an easy ride. It will be disruptive, and I think that's one other thing which is a takeaway for me. We need to be honest with that and talk honestly to people that we are not going on an easy journey, that it's very demanding, but that we believe in the expertise of the people on the ground, and that we want to use that expertise actually on a daily basis. And that's why I'm also so much optimistic about renewable energies. We were talking about the revenue stream here. In my region, we've spent billions and billions and billions of euros and Deutschmarks before that, giving money to other countries for bringing energy to us in terms of gas or oil. We're spending a lot of money to the US right now, buying your LNG stuff, which helps us substitute Russian gas. That's fine. But actually, I want to spend that money in my local communities. And that's what renewable energies are for. That will help us. And I'm always looking at this quote from Jens Südekum, an economist from Germany. He said, "The country which is the first to achieve climate and resource neutrality has secured its economic base on global markets for the next decades." And I really believe in that. And I think it will help us to actually go on in that change and to actually make people more optimistic about it.
Sebastian, thank you. Lisa, key takeaways, points that you want us to hold on to as we wrap up this conversation.
Yeah, so I've spoken a lot about involving people in a dialogue, in a conversation, and enabling people to share their experiences, and also to use their experiences in this big transformation. But I'd like to add also, and maybe that's not a surprise, me coming from a progressive think tank, is redistribution. Like we need to redistribute. There are enormous gains to be had from a green transformation, but these gains will materialize in the future somewhere else. We need to use these gains to pay for the cost that people experience here and now. And there are huge gains to be made, really, also of the green industrial transformation that many parts of Sweden are living now, but many times the big gains are materializing in the capital, in Stockholm, and people living in the area where the industry is set up, well, just experiences higher housing prices, and you know that the local grocery shop is catering to some fly in, fly out workers from Stockholm who pay their tax money somewhere else. So I think redistribution is really key here. So I'd like to add that as a takeaway as well. And also, it's very inspiring to talk to all of you, and I'm looking forward to continue this conversation as well.
Lisa, thank you. And Aaron, to you, the last word, your key takeaways, suggestions, things you wish we're holding on to.
Thank you. Yeah, the discussion shows we have similar problems, so why not learn from each other? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel at once, or everybody by himself. And such a format like this will help to give solutions to the others. And especially if we look at the rural communities, they can be even promoters of change. When I think back when I was a child, in my village we had over 20 dairy farmers. Now there is only one left. So you can see the only thing in that region that is stable is change. And as you said, Sebastian, especially people in the rural areas, they are very well known of adapting and changing something like that. So I think what I take also with me is that we should trust people and tell them, don't be afraid of change. Yeah, trust to yourself, and we should then enable and trust them and tell them, well, we believe as politicians also that we can do this. And thank you all very much for the discussion today. I learned quite a bit, and I think this should be the start of something. Thank you very much.
Brent, I couldn't agree more. I hope this is the start of something, and what a great group and great ideas shared, and again, the start of a conversation, not the end of one, but to bring us together to look at what we share and look at the challenges. So again, Baron, thank you. Sebastian, thank you. Matt, thank you. Lisa, thank you. And of course, thanks to all who joined this conversation, either watching in real time or perhaps streaming this later on demand, wishing to be a part of this work. And of course, thanks to John Austin, the leader of our Transforming Industrial Heartlands initiative, calling folks together and imagining conversations like this, with many others contributing to that and the work ahead. For more information on the Transforming Industrial Heartlands initiative and the work these folks are doing, head over to the JES's website, jeserie.org. There you'll also find videos of past presentations available to stream on demand, publications, reports, essays, timely writing, and more. And be sure to connect with us on the social platform of your choice and find more conversations there. For the Jefferson Educational Society and on behalf of the Transforming Industrial Heartlands Initiative, I'm Ben Spagan. Thanks for listening and learning with us.